It's been a while since we spoke. I think you've been very busy, haven't you,
Yeah.
one with another?
Thanks for moving it starting earlier too. That's a big help. I appreciate it.
It's very useful. So, I mean, it's hard to know where to start with you. There's so much going on, but I suppose the obvious point would be Ukraine, and specifically sort of US attempts to, I mean, I call them attempts. I don't know if you would call them attempts. Donald Trump's attempts to broker a ceasefire or a ceasefire deal don't really seem to have come to very much so far. So I just wondered what your take on the situation was currently, really.
Well, I think the background is that Trump just wants to get this war off the table. He views it as Joe Biden's war. He said during the campaign it never would have happened if he had been president, and he just wants it over with. It's just not anything he wants to deal with. He also wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize, so this struck him as one of several convenient opportunities to do it. And he also said during the campaign, because he's, after all, the art of the deal man, that if he could get Zelensky and Putin in a room for 24 hours, that would be all it took. Well, obviously, none of that turned out to be true. And I think he has found that each for their own reasons, Zelensky and Putin are not inclined to agree to just any ceasefire. The terms of the ceasefire mean a lot to both of them for different reasons. And there's no meeting of the minds. It's not a failure of diplomacy. It's a reality that the Ukrainians think they're fighting for their freedom and independence, which they don't want to give up. And Putin's fighting to recreate the Russian Empire. And he can't do that until he gets Ukraine. And probably worst of all is that whether he's right or wrong, the Russians and Putin think they have the momentum. So they're not inclined to stop when they think things on the ground are moving in their direction. I don't happen to agree with that assessment from the Russian point of view, but it's neither here nor there. Putin has not shown any real interest in a ceasefire, which I think Trump has now essentially acknowledged publicly.
Okay, so there are two things coming off of that. Then, firstly, is Trump's kind of rhetoric, if you like. He does this now and again. He says, "I won't be happy," or he's playing with fire. But I just wonder, the more he deploys those kind of words or that rhetoric, I wonder how that maybe becomes less effective if he kind of keeps saying this. Does it become like the boy who cried wolf or something? I wonder how intimidating it actually really comes across.
Well, it's obviously not having much effect on Putin, and I think Putin may risk overplaying his hand here, that he may push Trump too far. That's possible. He's not always right, but he is a former KGB agent. He knows how to manipulate people, and he knows how to manipulate Trump. Trump thinks he and Putin are friends. That's not how Putin sees Trump. That's for sure. I can tell you, I first met Putin in October of 2001, right after 9/11, and met him, any number of times since then. A very cold-blooded guy, and he pursues Russian national interest. And I don't think they're on a level playing field when he and Trump get together. So since Trump thinks he's talking to a friend, he doesn't want to threaten him. He doesn't want to break the friendship. And he thinks maybe Putin will come to his senses. Now, in the past week or 10 days, some of the things Trump has said, I think, have been efforts to put some distance between him and Putin. He said things like, "I don't know what the hell he's up to. I don't understand this." Meaning, if it were the old Trump who was my friend, we could have made a deal. But this is the old Putin. This is a different Putin. And, I'm not, he's not the same person. But I still don't see any real prospect of, at this point, of significant additional U.S. sanctions. I think the real question is, will Trump, if he withdraws diplomatically from an effort to bridge differences and make a ceasefire, will he continue providing U.S. military assistance, including intelligence? That's the key. If he cuts that off, that's very serious. But if he simply stops diplomatic efforts and continues U.S. assistance, then I think not much changes. With Putin himself, then, I mean, you said you've met him a number of times, and I mean, obviously there was that very famous comment about the greatest tragedy of the 20th century being the collapse of the Soviet Union, which is very illustrative of the way he thinks. So what, with that in mind, then, is his objectives presumably are just to kind of reconstitute that
empire to an extent, then, really, isn't it? If
he's been very clear about that, and I think it's not just Putin. I think we all make a mistake when we call it Putin's war. There are a lot of Russians who agree with us. They agree with the whole idea that the breakup of the Soviet Union was a great Western plot. We have foisted this upon Russia, and to get back to being a key international player again, they need to recreate the empire. So when Putin says that, he's talking about really a very strong perspective inside Russia, and that perspective tells them that they don't have an empire unless they have Ukraine, and they need Belarus too. They basically got Belarus, not formally remerged with Russia, but effectively so. They want the same with Ukraine.
Yeah, and therefore, if we bear that in mind, that's so far removed from Ukraine's kind of perspective, then, that the idea of kind of a negotiated settlement looks rather far-fetched, doesn't it?
Well, I think it is far-fetched, and I think that's why even a ceasefire, in my view, is not necessarily in Ukraine's interest. If they hold a ceasefire along the existing lines of control, and then say, okay, we'll negotiate after a ceasefire, you could negotiate in Geneva or Vienna for years and not get anywhere. But the longer that line of control exists, then it becomes, the more likely it is to become a de facto Ukraine-Russian border, which means as of now, Ukraine would have lost 20% of its territory.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the other point is that, in your experiences, presumably will bear this out, Russia's ideas of negotiating don't really match up to a Western idea of negotiating, did they? I think that, I mean, if you look at the Minsk Accords, that wasn't really a kind of an agreement in the conventional sense, was it? It was just them using that to push the boundaries and get what they want.
It was a disaster. I mean, both Minsk Accords have been mistakes, and Ukraine suffered from them. This was a French-German initiative, and largely gave Russia what it wanted in hopes they would stop in 2014, which yeah, they did. That's true. They came back in 22. Mm-hmm. And unless there are either clear endpoints to this discussion or clear security guarantees for Ukraine, you could have a ceasefire tomorrow, and it wouldn't preclude Russia coming back in 4 or 5 years after they rebuild their army. That's why I think for Russia, it is in their interest to have a ceasefire, because they've suffered appalling casualties. And much of their Black Sea fleet is now on the floor of the Black Sea.
Yeah.
So I would think they would say, I need relief from this to get back in a position where I can try a third invasion of Ukraine whenever they get ready.
How does NATO fit into this in terms of other NATO countries now? Then, I mean, they'll be watching what's going on quite sort of carefully, and I just wonder how. What does Mark Rutte do? What does Starmer do? What does Macron do here? I mean, can they influence Trump? Can they influence this process? Or I don't know. I just wonder where their thoughts are.
Well, I think it's both the ideal of Putin and Trump to resolve this between themselves, not to have Zelensky in the room, not to have the Europeans in the room. And I think if Putin succeeds in pushing Trump back and not suffering new sanctions or other penalties, he'll brush the Europeans off without a hesitation. He's not worried about it. You know, the latest sanctions package the EU is talking about, the press reports, is the 17th sanctions package since the invasion in February of 2022. 17 packages. Why wasn't there one package 1 week after the invasion? This is how Russia survives the sanctions. There, certain sanctions are imposed. They find ways to evade them or mitigate them. Another set of sanctions are imposed. They evade them. You got, if you're going to do sanctions as a form of economic warfare, you have to treat it as a form of warfare and impose it all at once. You know, have shock and awe economically. You don't have 17 packages. I know the Europeans probably didn't set out to do that, but that's what they've done. Propose an 18th package of sanctions. It's just not going to have the effect people think.
I wonder if that maybe tells us about how the European Union operates as well, though, in the sense that.
Oh, absolutely. You know, they're long on rhetoric and short on performance.
Yeah. If we sort of go back to just it's quite interesting what you said about Putin. Did you just remind me? Did you see Trump and Putin together ever, or were you ever in the room? Yeah, I mean, characterize without kind of giving any national security secrets away or anything like that. I mean, what was the sort of energy like? How did you perceive their interactions?
Well, I think Trump clearly wanted to be friendly, but in most of these conversations, he really doesn't know much about the subject matter. He may say over and over again, "Oh, there's so much killing, we've got to have a ceasefire." He can say that 8 or 10 different ways, but it's not a way to advance the ball. Whereas Putin probably prepares for the meetings better than Trump does, which would be easy because Trump doesn't hardly prepares at all. But also, Putin's got decades of experience on these issues. And he knows, he's thought through what he thinks Russia's interests are, and he knows what he thinks he needs to do to advance those interests. Trump just goes in and wings it. So it's not a fair fight. And I was always happy just to have the discussions end without them agreeing to anything, because it wouldn't have been to our advantage, most likely, if they had.
Yeah. Did you watch Putin while he was talking to Trump? And I imagine you probably just kept an eye on the body language to some extent. And I guess you drew your conclusions. You could perhaps see Putin's mind working in ways that Trump's perhaps weren't.
Well, I think I saw Putin throughout as being very self-assured. He knows what he wants, and I think he's got Trump's mark. And so he was, it was never, the conversations never were characterized by disagreement or anything else. They were always very professional. But you could see Putin working toward his objective, and Trump just having a nice conversation.
Do you think Trump admires Putin then? I mean, is that a stretch? Or I mean, I just kind of find their dynamic a little bit odd. The way Trump called him Vladimir, didn't he, in a post on X or other Truth Social quite recently? It seems to me I wouldn't say look up to him, but he seems to kind of like him.
Yeah, well, he does like him. He envies him, though. He'd like to be a big guy like Putin and Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un. After he met Kim Jong-un in Singapore for the first time, he said, "We fell in love," which I'll guarantee is not how Kim Jong-un looks at it. He doesn't understand the kind of dynamic he's in. He thinks he's dealing with another Manhattan real estate dealer.
That's exactly what I was going to say, actually. Perhaps this is exposing the limits of being a real estate guy, and that's the thing, isn't it? And everything can be reduced to square yardage and just shaking hands on property and things like that, which I suppose is what he's used to. He's good in Wall Street and good in that area, but that's not what he needs to do here, is it? It's just
right.
Right. If we could just move on quickly to talk about the Middle East, because I know that's obviously something that you've specialized in over the years. I mean, how do relations between Israel and Palestine ever become normalized? How can this ever be sorted out now? It's such a mess, it seems to me. I just wonder what happens next.
Well, I think the idea of a two-state solution is finished, essentially. I think the big overarching question remains the Iranian threat, its support for terrorist proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah, the Houthis and others, and its nuclear weapons program. And we're right on the cusp of an Israeli decision, one way or the other, to strike militarily at Iran's nuclear weapons program. They're not going to be peace and security in the Middle East until the Ayatollahs are overthrown. I think that's clear. Okay. And whether they will be or not is anybody's guess. But I think the after October 7, I mean, it's an 80-20 issue, as we say in the States, but it's an 80-20 issue in Israel. They're not going to accept a two-state solution. I just think it's dead. So the question given, I mean, the West Bank is really a different issue than Gaza. What do you do with the residents of Gaza? I've been told by Arab governments within the past weeks that something like 10% of the Palestinian population in Gaza has already left. So that would be roughly 200,000 people, most of them gone to Egypt. They've paid smugglers and human traffickers and whatnot, whatever little money they had to get out. And I think ultimately that's what people have to look at. The most humane thing to do is to put people in viable economic circumstances. They have jobs, they have work, their children have a future. If you rebuild Gaza as a high-rise refugee camp, you're going to end up exactly where we were pre-October the 7th. Nobody wants to live in a refugee camp, and yet that was the radical Arab strategy from the 50s and the 60s, to keep the Palestinians up close as a wedge against Israel for when the time came to drive Israel into the sea. Well, that isn't going to happen. But the Palestinian refugees are still stuck there, and it's just time to wake up to the fact that isn't going to work.
You mentioned Iran, and obviously that's, I suppose, at the heart of all of this, because that's where the pressure's coming from, isn't it? I mean, they bankroll a lot of these groups, really, or at least indirectly or directly. I mean, we've also in this country had some fairly alarming incidents of. I know there was a terror plot foiled, you probably know about, in which I think some Iranian terrorists were going to target the Israeli embassy.
Right.
Should we thinking about a kind of regime change in Iran, or is that not really it? Is it more the idea that eventually that regime will topple and things will change? I wonder what happens with that Islamic Republic.
Yeah, look, I'm going to have to go here in a minute, but yeah, look, I think the regime in Iran is weaker than at any point since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And particularly since the murder of Mahsa Amini 2 years ago, roughly now, who was the Kurdish woman who was killed for violating the dress code. And it stirred up the women of Iran. And so now you've got economic discontent, you've got ethnic discontent, you've got youth versus the government. 2/3 of the population roughly is under 30. And now 50% of the population is irritated with the Ayatollah. So when you put all these things together, it's different people dissatisfied for different reasons, but the dissatisfaction level is very high. And if Israel, for example, destroys the nuclear program on top of the loss of the Assad regime, the pummeling that the terrorist proxies have taken, there's already good reason to think there is finger pointing and recriminations going on for the loss of all that. And if the nuclear program went, Iranian people would say, you've spent billions on all this stuff for decades. It's all gone now. None of it benefited us at all. I mean, I think it would leave the regime in a very weakened state. I think that's the position it's in.
Do you think that's a viable option for Israel that they're seriously considering then? I mean, they've done that in the past. I mean, I can't exactly, they've targeted facilities in Iran in the past, haven't they?
Well, they have. Yeah, they have. And they also, in 1981, they destroyed the Saddam Hussein's Osirak nuclear reactor outside of Baghdad. In September of 2007, they destroyed the Iranian Deir al-Zor reactor. It's in the desert in Syria near Deir al-Zor that the North Koreans were building for them. Israel didn't ask U.S. permission in either of those cases. So they know where the Iranian nuclear facilities are. There may be others they don't know about, but they know about a lot of them. And one of the things that Israel did in retaliating for the October last year, October 24 ICBM attack, is that they destroyed all of Iran's Russian S-300 air defense systems. So the Iranians have other air defense systems, but they're very low level compared to what the F-35s that Israel had could do. So they've got a free hand over Iran, and I think the Iranians are very worried. That's why they want to drag out these negotiations that they're having with Woodcock. Because the more time they have, the more they can conceal stuff, the more they can try and harden it, do all kinds of things to try and mitigate the effect of an Israeli attack.
Yeah. So you think Israel would be mulling this over then? Put it that
I think
way.
it's on their minds right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that more or less covers it, Mr. Bolton. Actually, I know you're busy, so I'm sure you've got other things to talk about. But
when are you writing from or for?
Oh, sorry, it's a Daily Express.
No, but what? Oh, you have a publication date?
Oh yes, sorry. Tomorrow, I think I'll get it online tomorrow, and I'm going to pitch it for the paper, and maybe I can get it in the paper as well. But I'm going to finish now, and I'll sort of turn my attention to this, but I don't want to rush it, so I'll spend the evening knocking this out. And yeah, I mean, maybe we could pick it up again a bit later. See how
Yeah, well, other things are going to happen. They could happen at a pretty fast clip, so stay in touch.
Well, they really will, yes. Wonderful to talk to you. Have a nice rest of the day, and I'll speak to you again, I hope.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Take care now.